Thanks again for joining. Today we will be discussing the new, not so new, EU NIS2 Directive regulation. So I would guess if you've signed up for this webinar, you've probably heard about the updated NIS Directive. But just to give you some context, in 2016, the European Commission instituted the first EU-wide cybersecurity initiative, the NIS Directive. And although it enhanced the EU's cyber resilience, member states implemented it independently and differently, which then led into fragmented supervision and essentially enforcement. So in 2020, they decided to review the original NIS directive and decided to update it. And the so talked about NIS2 directive was then created and will have to be passed into national law by member states by October 17th of 2024. So pretty much exactly in a year's time. So today's webinar is essentially dedicated to reviewing and really understanding this directive, in particular, how it applies to mobile security and mobile strategy, understanding what it means for you as a business and how you can best prepare for your mobile security strategy. So I'll give you a quick rundown of NIS2 and later show you a strategy on how to deal with the NIS2 compliance requirements and also any further regulations that might be coming in the future. Right, so before we get started, a little bit about us, the speakers. So I have my colleague Yang Yin joining me today. So Yang, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Yang Yin Ho. I'm a senior sales engineer for Zimperium in the German-speaking region of Europe. I've been working in enterprise mobility for the past a little over a decade now. And I'm very happy to talk about NIS2 today with you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Yang. And myself, Ines, commercial sales manager for our EMEA region at Zimperium. I've been with Zimperium for 3 years now, and I'm based in rainy London. So before we get to dive into the NIS2 directive and sort of get a better understanding of what it means, a little bit about Zimperium. So we are an American company HQ'd in Dallas, founded in 2010, so 13 years ago. We are a mobile-first business, a mobile-first company. Now, what does that mean? It's very simple. We secure mobile. All our tools are made and developed for mobile. So we protect mobile devices, we protect mobile endpoints, as well as mobile applications. We have numerous strategic partners. So if you are or ever were using, for instance, SentinelOne's MTD product or Avanti's MTD, then you have used Zimperium. Right, so on the next slide, thank you, Yang, you'll essentially get a better understanding of what exactly we do. On the one hand, we have our ZMTD product, which is our mobile threat defense product, securing corporate and BYO devices for some of the world's largest companies. We have millions of devices secured around the world. So looking into the different threat vectors that you see there on the screen, so that is the device itself, the networks that your devices are connecting to, the applications or thousands of apps that you have in these in your mobile fleet and in these devices, and then the user and what your users are clicking on, which is often quite important in regards to phishing, smishing, and all of that. So it is an on-device agent in the form of an app that sits on your phone in the background, looking pretty much for bad behavior, and does all its detection in the device. So that is including zero-day threats, so never seen before in the wild threats like Pegasus, like T-bot, like FluBot. There's pretty much a new one every week, if not every day. So we cover those as well. And on the other side, our map suite. So that is helping companies better protect their mobile applications from the development to the runtime with, as you see there, binary scanning to identify vulnerabilities in your code before you ship the app, obfuscation to protect your IP, white box cryptography to protect your keys so they're never exposed in plain text, and mobile RASP for device attestation. So now let's have a deep dive into the NIS2 directive. So I'll let Yang take it away.
Right. Before we start, I wanted to show you this link. Basically, if you follow this link, you will be presented with the NIS2 directive as it was launched or as it was released by the EU Commission. The reason why I like to highlight this is because if you look for NIS2 information on the broad internet or on YouTube or other sources, you will always find secondary literature or secondary sources where people will tell you their take on NIS2. And then on top of that, there's this confusion around how is my national lawmaker going to implement it into regional law, right, or into regional legislation? And that creates a lot of confusion. So in today's webinar, we wanted to run you through the most important articles in the NIS2 framework from the primary source, right? Read through the articles as they were intended by the EU Commission, but it's very important to understand what the EU Commission wants to achieve, and especially why they're trying to do it, right? This is not going to be another GDPR exercise where we're going to be confronted with some annoying compliance framework. There's a real reason why we're doing this exercise, right? The EU Commission has noted that the damages that are caused by cyber attacks or by digital adversaries are increasing steadily over the past at least 5 years. If you go through crime statistics in your country, you will notice that cybercrime has been picking up speed, especially if you pay attention to the rate between reported cybercrimes and the rate of resolution, right? Or the rate basically on how enforcement agencies like police or other criminal agencies can resolve that crime and actually find a suspect, bring them to justice and whatnot. So to kick it off, this is going to be extremely boring looking, like a class in law, right? But yeah, we're going to run you through the highlights. Okay, so first of all, Article 1 defines what the EU Commission is trying to achieve. Mostly, it's about creating a increased standard for cybersecurity posture, right? So the EU Commission realized that basically every entity is handling cybersecurity differently. If you ask yourself, right, what do you define or what is your understanding of cybersecurity, then it might vastly differ from what your neighbor is thinking of cybersecurity or what your colleagues are thinking about cybersecurity. And then if you go the next step and say, what do we actually do in terms of cybersecurity? Then it becomes a very vague, almost philosophical conversation, right? So in order to tackle that issue, the main goal, this is why it's stipulated in Article 1, the very first paragraph of it, right? The very first sentence. The main goal for the NIS2 directive is to increase the overall security posture of the entire broader European economy and its partners. In order to do that, the EU Commission extended basically the entities that are affected by NIS2 by articulating that in Annex 1 and Annex 2. If you want to go through if you want to click that link from the beginning, at the very bottom, you will find 3 annex sections. Annex 1 and Annex 2 will basically list all the verticals that are classified as important and as a critical entity. And you will be surprised. I bet you would be surprised who's going to be affected by it, right? So basically, the general heuristic here is anyone who contributes to the, let's say, to the operation, to the day-to-day operations of the EU or of daily civilian life is affected by NIS2. That includes you if you are a waste disposal agency, a food manufacturer, a car manufacturer, a public transportation entity, right? Train, air travel company, basically anything that is somewhat connected to civilian life. Now, how are we trying to do that, right? We want to, or the European Commission wants to standardize a set of rules for how to regulate how we deal with cybersecurity incidents, and especially how we share information across entities, despite of GDPR regulations, right? So we had a GDPR exercise a few years ago where basically the gist was make sure that you don't share any unnecessary data, and if you absolutely have to share data, make sure that everybody who might be affected by it knows that you are sharing that data, right? That is kind of, I wouldn't say obsolete, but NIS2 accounts for the fact that in certain situations, it is absolutely critical to share information on certain threats, right? On certain attack patterns with other entities in your industry, with authorities and whatnot. And at that point, NIS2 is overruling GDPR regulations. And lastly, in terms of subject matter, this entire activity, this entire exercise has been fully monitored and supervised by the EU Commission. We'll learn about this later on in different articles that stipulate rules around how the EU is trying to enforce this framework. But basically keep in mind, the EU has let's say, a vested interest in the success of NIS2. This is somewhat unique to different directives or other frameworks that the EU has been released prior to this.
Thank you, Yang. Right, so as for Article 5, here, what's important to understand is that everything we will talk about today is essentially the minimum requirement the EU is enforcing. So you can think of this as sort of a non-negotiable, a bare minimum that you will have to achieve by next year. As for Article 6, we dive into definitions, which are, of course, of paramount importance in order to really understand this piece of legislation. So when in Article 6 it is mentioned any device, this obviously includes your desktop PC, your laptops, your IoT devices, your printers, but also your mobile phones and your smartphones, your tablets. So anything that is considered a device and is connecting to a network. It is also stated here that anything that is processing, that stores and retreats data needs to be secured, which in turn means that your mobile applications are also affected. So pretty much all your mobile apps are affected by the NIS2 regulation. So what does that mean? You're probably asking yourself, your mobile phones and apps are affected by NIS2. So the EU Commission is stating here that you have to be able to resist any attack to a mobile device. So when stating any attack, that includes unknown attacks or zero-day attacks, never seen in the wild before type of attacks. So this is actually very, very new. For the first time, we're really taking into account that we are behind the curve in technical development, or technological development rather, and also how predominant zero-day attacks are becoming. So as for Article 20, this one's most about who is liable, so liability, and here it states that management bodies of essential and important entities will be liable. So the important thing here to note is the wording chosen, right? Management bodies. So the EU Commission was really keen on including this sort of wider term, as well as putting it on a personal liability. So management bodies can be held liable for infringements. So essentially you as a CISO or a senior manager can be held liable for that, which creates some sort of urgency to adhere to NIS2 as well.
Awesome, right. So as you noticed, we are not going article by article, line by line, right? Because obviously that would be a little too boring. Well, mostly we want to direct your attention to the articles that we think are very important because they're fairly new in terms of regulation, right? Or in terms of a lawmaker spending time on. And what we just heard in Article 20, right, in terms of liability, that applies to everything that comes after Article 20, right? So everything Article 21 and forward, everything that is stipulated there in terms of how you are supposed to protect against what kind of a threat, right? How you're supposed to collaborate with other entities around it. It's essentially what we're going to talk about now. So Article 21 stipulates the regulations around cybersecurity risk measures, or basically how the EU thinks you should handle cybersecurity in general. Obviously, we don't have to go through every item line by line here, right? But basically, later on, if you have the time, go to that link from the very beginning. I think we're going to share this presentation with you as well. And read through it, right? Make sure you understand what the EU Commission means when they say that you should at least make sure that policies on risk analysis and information system security are in place. Think about that. Are you doing that right now, right? What are you doing in terms of incident handling? How are you logging incidents? How are you handling incidents? How are you resolving incidents, right? What are your efforts in terms of business continuity right now? How do you make sure that your contractual partners, your entire supply chain basically abides to these regulations as well, right? One thing that I wanted to highlight here is that the EU Commission also states that you should have a framework in place or a strategy in place essentially on how to handle encryption or cryptography. Have you ever thought about that, right? Have you ever thought about how you connect to sensitive resources? We always just assume, hey, I see that little certificate icon, or I see that little SSL icon over there in the browser, so I'm pretty sure that it's safe. I rely on my IT department to make sure that our communication is encrypted and whatnot. But how much time do you actually spend on thinking about how you're handling encryption processes, especially when you build your own applications, right? Think about that. And if you don't have a appropriate answer to it, then feel free to reach out to us. We might have something in store for you. Article 21 then goes on in paragraph 3 to talk about supply chain in more detail, right? So basically, the EU Commission, for example, doesn't have any jurisdiction in the UK or in the US territories. However, whoever, if you are an entity that wants to do business with a European company or a European entity, right? If you, let's say, you are a components manufacturer and you want to cater to I don't know, German car manufacturers, or you are a food distributor and you want to cater to a French food distributor or something like that, right? You have to also abide to these NIS2 regulations. Or to phrase it more precisely, that European entity has to make sure that your cybersecurity processes are in line with NIS2 regulations. Otherwise, they might be in violation with that compliance framework over here. So it's very important to note, right, that NIS2 is not just a European thing, as basically the Europeans been extra cautious, and it affects you as a non-European entity as well. All right. Now, what happens when you don't comply with NIS2 frameworks, right? So basically, if it becomes evident to the EU Commission that someone is in severe violation, let's put it this way, of compliance. Obviously, they're not gonna invade your corporate offices if you are in a small violation or something, if you're a little behind the curve. But if they notice that you are in stark violation of this compliance framework, then they reserve the right, so to speak, to enforce supervisory measures ex post, which essentially means that after the fact, after they learn that you are in violation of these regulations, they can then enforce certain measures that you then have to implement, which can be extremely annoying, especially when you think about how long it takes for you these days to roll out a new software, right, or a new solution. How much time do you usually take to evaluate a software, go into price negotiations, right? Find a service provider that helps you with the implementation. You have to train your employees, you have to train your staff, right? You have to do troubleshooting and those kind of things. It takes time, and you definitely want to make sure to have the right solution that fits your workflows, right? That fits your business character. And if the EU Commission then comes around and says, hey, you have to do what we tell you, you have to go with the provider that we enforce on you, you have to do exactly, or you have to basically implement the process that we outlined for you, it can be extremely annoying, extremely cost intense. And in order to avoid that, right, make sure to understand what Article 33 actually means for you in terms of supervision through the EU Commission. And keep in mind that there's a certain timeline, right? The EU Commission also stipulated in Article 41 that everything NIS2 related has to be done and dusted by October 17. Mainly, national lawmakers have to implement the NIS2 framework into their regional legislation. Try to look up the current state of the NIS2 adoption process in your country. I am based in Germany, in Berlin, and looking through the last Referentenentwurf, as it is called in German, of the NIS2 adoption law. Germans are very particular about that, right? So they they came up with a NIS2 adoption law before they actually will release launch the actual NIS2 law. But yeah, the state right now is that at least the German lawmaker hasn't adjusted NIS2 to reflect the business situation of German companies, at least in my humble opinion, right? Make sure to review yours in your regions, and if you have the chance, right? If you have the respective context, try to lobby with your national lawmakers to account for your economical requirements, right? To make sure that it's not just you know how it works, right, with technology. There's never a one-fits-all approach. Make sure that if you can influence the national lawmaker to let them know about your unique requirements in terms of cybersecurity efforts. All right. This right here basically says that everything is in effect October 18, 2024, right? This is also very important to note. Usually with the legislation, the process is that the lawmaker debates in parliament about how to do it, right? And then usually legislation gets into effect January 1st. NIS2, however, everything will be in effect October 18th. So basically, exactly a year from now, and that's a hard deadline, right? This is there's no way around that. So our recommendation would be to get in front of the curve, make sure that you are prepared for when the hammer drops, so to speak. There is a very good reason for why we're doing this. I mentioned it earlier ago, and I believe Ines wants to say a few things about why we're talking about this tool.
Brilliant, Yang. Thank you. Right. So we all know that technology is getting more and more advanced, and essentially this results in statistics like the ones you see here. So over the past 5 years, we had an increasing number of significant incidents, which Yang mentioned in the beginning of the presentation. So a significant incident being defined as an incident causing damages over 1 million US dollars, or that has targeted a critical infrastructure. And if we extrapolate these numbers, which of course are very scary numbers, obviously the current trend creates a vulnerability gap, which may have different impacts on your business. So it is becoming, on the one side, easier and easier to tamper with your infrastructure, as your devices aren't managed, and can access corporate sensitive data and resources. Then you also have an abundance of apps that you can't possibly take action on. And essentially, these are creating blind spots and exposure points to different forms of attacks. On the other side, your resources tend to stay the same. IT departments are not growing per se. So that creates a risk that can be translated into financial impact and reputational damage. And that is for you to decide how big the impact of cybersecurity is for your business. So hence why we should raise awareness for regulations, and specifically this EU-wide regulation. So this is to say that there is a real reason on why the EU Commission is doing this. And at this point, I'd say NIS2 is a reaction to tackle this issue that is targeting the economy. And in order to prevent that, corporations need to increase their cybersecurity posture.
Yeah, so basically, just to mention a little anecdote here, the rapporteur for this NIS2 commission is Bart Groothuis, I believe from the Netherlands. And in an interview, he mentioned that there's a very good reason for the fines that are specified in the NIS2 framework. If you go through the NIS2 framework, basically, if you follow that link that I shared at the beginning, you will find numbers. I think it's either 10 million US dollars or 2% of your previous year's gross income, or $7 million and 1.5 or 1% of your previous year's gross income. Those are the fines for violations of the NIS2 framework. And the reason why they chose these numbers is because, according to statistics, within the EU, there's at least one ransomware attack that is being paid by the victim in the average amount of around 10 million euros. So these numbers are not completely random, right? They noticed a regular cadence of cyber attacks with where the victim basically said, all right, you know what, let's just pay whatever they're asking for and be done with it. And then the EU Commission says, this is creating so much damages that it doesn't really matter for companies whether they pay us a fine for not increasing their security posture, or if they eventually get hit by a ransomware attack and then have to pay that fine, that ransomware essentially, right? So in order to protect yourself against these kind of attacks, right, in order to be compliant with NIS2, we suggest basically a 5-step approach. We call them 5 principles of a mobile first security strategy, in order to come up with a scalable concept on how to do security in essence, right? So at the beginning, we already touched point with the fact that our understanding of security, especially cybersecurity, and especially in the mobile context, is very, very vague. Right? We don't really know where to put or where to start, right? And our first principle basically addresses that point. The first principle being prioritize risk at the edge. Basically, be aware of what you have to secure, right? Be aware of the vulnerability entry points into your corporation. And that being all your mobile devices, as well as all your mobile applications, right? If you think about your own personal usage, I'm pretty sure everyone in this webinar is using a mobile device, an Android or an iOS device, right, for personal use. And then there are those people that say, "Oh, I separate personal from private use, right? I have a device for personal and for work use." But then oftentimes we use our personal device to, I don't know, access corporate email, right? And even if it's not email, even if you're that strict with yourself and say, "I am not going to enroll my corporate email account on my personal device," which I'm pretty sure at least a few of you are doing, then still people are using their personal device for multi-factor authentication, right? You supply your phone number to your multi-factor authentication tool, whichever you use. And then when you log onto your emails, you get a push notification to your smartphone to confirm that you are actually who you pretend to be, right? And you have authorization to access your email account. So there are so many processes that you can't really separate anymore from strictly personal and corporate usage, personal and work use. So make sure you understand what you have to secure, right, in terms of devices. And then in terms of applications, it's the same thing, right? The backlog in app development or digitalization efforts essentially has been growing exponentially over, I don't know, at least the last 5 years. So app developers these days are under so much time pressure that they are using open source libraries, right? They're using SDKs that provide certain functionality. But then who's to say that the open source library that you take from GitHub or from any other source is actually completely free of any malicious code, right? Or any malicious lines of code. So be aware of what you actually have to secure is principle number one. Principle number two would be operate in a known state, meaning create as much visibility into your operations as possible. So many attacks happen with us completely unaware of them, right? If you look through the patch notes of device manufacturers, let's take Apple as an example, right? If you go through the patch notes, in every patch note, you will find a very scary list of zero-day exploits that have been fixed by Apple, which is great, right? But then ask yourself, how many of these exploits did you know of prior to the patch, right? So basically, there's so many threats, there's so many exploits that you don't know about, and that is why it's so important to create visibility around your current security posture, right? How secure are you actually? How much do you understand? How far does your knowledge or does your understanding go in terms of assessing your current security posture? Principle number three would be to step up your detection and response, basically meaning come up with some form of a strategy of how to deal with what kind of a threat. And this is very important if you compare that to let's call it simplistic tools such as antivirus solutions, right? An antivirus solution in the past used to be database driven. You have a list of malware signatures, and then once a day on a regular cadence, you scan your device for those known malware signatures, right? That is essentially you trying to predict the future, right? You trying to predict that you will be hit by a specific malware. Security doesn't work like that, right? You can never know where the attacker is coming from, who's the adversaries are going to use. So it's important to basically get rid of that approach. Let's try to predict the future and step into a more strategically driven approach, right? Where you have a strategy in place that kind of gives you a framework of how to behave in a certain attack. Who do I talk to in order to get it resolved, right? Who do I talk to inform them of my exposure, of my incident, to protect them in turn, right? To protect my supply chain. So being strategic about your security concept, very important. Principle number four would be to enhance your strategy by introducing automation, right? So principle four is start the autonomous journey. We've seen the vulnerability gap. It's literally exploding. If you consider that mobile devices are becoming more and more, and then if you put IoT devices on top of that, it's virtually impossible for an IT department to handle each and every individual threat log that is coming in from those devices. So you have to have a certain automation around it by introducing or by integrating your threat detection with a mobile device management platform, by integrating your solution with a SIEM or generally an XDR platform to create not just visibility, but also to apply some logic, right? To make sense to all the data that you generate from your threat detection, to then understand how to tackle what type of threat, right? And ideally, you want to do that automatically. Imagine a situation where, let's say, you have an exposure to a malware or something on your device, and you would have to then go to your IT department, wait in line to them handle your device or to clean it up so that you can reuse the device, right? It's not practical. It's extremely cost intense, and your entire workflow would come to a system. So automation is key here. And then the nature of today's webinar, right? Principle number 5, be compliant with your local regulations. Never break the law. It is extremely annoying to keep up with all those regulations. NIS2 has already created its fair share of irritation and confusion in the market. It's important to have some form of a trusted advisor that you can talk to about these regulations to understand what those regulations mean to you, right? And obviously, I won't just leave you with these 5 principles. Let me show you how we deal with them, or how we can help you to basically design your individual strategy around it. So if you remember principle number 1, which was it? Great question, right? There's a prize to win. I'm just kidding. The prize that you can win here is increased security posture. Principle number 1 was to be aware of what you have to protect, right? And as you can see here, our console, in our console, we protect your Android devices, we protect your iOS devices, we also protect Chrome devices, but we also protect your mobile applications, right? This icon over here, which says Zscan, will scan applications on the binary level to highlight all the weaknesses, all the potential vulnerabilities within your application's code. Does anyone remember principle number 2? Right, principle number 2 was to create visibility, right? To operate in a known state. As you can see from just one glance, within one console overview, you get a comprehensive security score across the entire device fleet. It's broken down in vulnerabilities depending on operating systems, in severity levels, and in process status, right? How many tickets do you have to resolve? How many tickets are still pending, and yada yada. This console then drills down deeper by showing you individual threat logs and a timeline on where exposure peaks happened, how far at front of the curve you are in terms of resolution of those tickets and whatnot. Right. Principle number 3 was to come up with a security strategy, right? So basically set a framework or define a framework how you want to react to what kind of a threat, right? Let's go through an example here. Let's say we want to protect us against malware, against suspicious apps. In that case, we can click on the settings icon over here. And I already pre-configured this a little bit, saying that on Android devices, I want to leverage the NOx data loss prevention. In my example, I'm using a Samsung device, right? And then in addition, I say that I want the NOx API to disable any malware. All right, so let's have a look at my demo device right here. On my demo device, I am going to install this test virus application. And once it's installed, as you can see here, I cannot open the application. Usually this icon would say open. It now says enable because our security policy disabled the application, right? So we specified a concept, right? We specified a framework. when we recognize or when we detect a malware, we want to disable that process. That's what we did right here. But in addition, we also want to activate a data loss prevention policy, which would basically prevent any attacker from extracting data through that malware that they introduced on our devices. So if I were to try to activate the Bluetooth, for example, it tells me that the security policy prevents the use of Bluetooth. The same goes for mobile data, right? If I click on the mobile data icon, it doesn't allow me to use mobile data. If my attacker had access to my device in the form of a remote view functionality or remote access functionality, and they wanted to copy paste information that in my example here, user credentials that I have in my email inbox, they can't even use a clipboard, right? Because the security policy prevents that from happening. So as you can see here, I specified a framework, right? I defined how I want to interact with malware, and that immediately kicks in. Now, to further enhance it, we introduce interactions with the device end user, right? So the user will then be informed how to potentially deal with that threat. In our case, the malware, we can just uninstall, right? We guide the user through that wizard here. And since we also stated that we want to block malware from once we identify the malware, right? Once this malware becomes known to us, we want to block it in the future. So if the user were to try to reinstall that application, they wouldn't be able to, because again, it's blocked by the security policy. Now, ideally, you want to integrate that also to other platforms such as MDMs, right? We integrate to all major MDM platforms to help you with principle number 4, right? For those of you who were paying attention, principle number 4 was around automation, right? Every information that we gather in terms of mobile threat detection, we can relay to a mobile device management console or to an XDR, to a CM platform, for you to automatically process that data, right? In the example of an MDM, we could advise the MDM of the current threat that we detected, and then the MDM can take automated action to isolate the device, to push down other security policies, or to, in the worst case, to factory reset the device, right? All right. I also mentioned that we can do that for your mobile applications, right? Zscan is a scan engine essentially that we can apply to the binary of your in-house developed application. So essentially to any application that you want to use in your workflows. And it works pretty similar to what we've seen for the endpoint security, right? You get a quick overview of the current security posture of your application across your device fleet. It drills down to individual threat logs. And then if you click on a threat log, it will break it down to what the specific issue is. In our example here, we have a chain of trust validation failure. We will break down, we will explain what the business impact is and what our recommendation would be to deal with that issue. Now, remember, principle number 5 in the mobile first strategy was to always be compliant with local regulations, right? Now, how many of you know by heart all the regulations of GDPR, of HIPAA, MASGAS, OWASP, NIAP, NIS2, right? And whatever else there is. It's extremely difficult to keep up with all those different regulations, especially if you're a cross-regional entity, right? Let's say you do business not just in the EU, but also in the Americas, in Asia. It's important to be up to date with these compliance regulations, and our platform will inform you if in this case, for example, you have a chain of trust validation failure in your application, how this is a violation in the context of HIPAA, for example, or MASGAS or OWASP. We then explain to you the context of that specific framework. Obviously, in the future, when NIS2 has been processed by your national lawmaker, we will account for that as well in our platform. Right. So that brings me to an end. I just want to reiterate that Zimperium can help you with designing your individual security strategy by providing our dynamic detection engine on device, by also providing you with a platform to protect your mobile applications and keys. And by doing so, we help your respective teams, right? Your organizational units that are responsible to assess security in general across your devices, across your user base, and to protect them essentially. We help your teams to respond to incidents and to investigate threats in detail, right? And we do that by integrating with different management systems like MDMs, XDRs, CMs, and other tools to then provide an entire comprehensive enterprise ecosystem. Right, and I believe that is everything we have to share with you today. Do you have any questions? Do we see any questions in the chat?
Yes, we seem to have 3 questions as of now. Feel free to
Awesome.
have any questions to leave them in the chat in the Q&A. Right, so the first one being, where are your cloud products data hosted, example, zConsole hosted, so US or EU, and whether they're Amazon or Microsoft Cloud or other.
That's a great question. We are a American company, as Ines explained earlier ago, but we are also a privacy-centric company, right? So we are fully ISO certified, and in order to reflect for the requirements for our European customers, we host European tenants in Europe, mostly around the Frankfurt area. You have the option to choose between Amazon, Azure, and Oracle, I believe.
Now, is there Zimperium ZMTD setting protection for NIS2?
That is a good question. And so basically you can't think of NIS2 as one button requirement, right? It's not just one line item that you then tick off. NIS2, like we seen earlier ago, is a framework to increase your overall security posture by enforcing you to come up with a concept of how to deal with incidents, how to design your security strategy, right? How to react to incidents, and how to collaborate with other entities that might also be affected by that same threat. And Zimperium's platform is helping you in that regard by accounting for threat detection on iOS, Android, and Chrome OS devices, right? So again, to remember, the NIS2 framework said in, what was it, Article 6 in definitions, right? That any device that connects to a network, any process that is accessing data, that is storing data, that's processing data, so that refers to your mobile applications, has to be accounted for in your security framework, right? And this is exactly what Zimperium does. We secure your mobile devices as well as your mobile applications on the binary code level, right? So to answer your question in short, yes, absolutely. Zimperium does help you to become NIS2 compliant. But in order to understand, when you drill down deeper into that question, you have to understand what the NIS2 framework essentially is trying to do here, right? It's trying to increase your overall security posture. And again, absolutely, Zimperium can help you with that.
Thank you, Yang. Brilliant. And just one last question, just to be aware of time. As you showed the zConsole, we have a question here on whether NOTS is needed to block the app.
No. My example was just because I have a Samsung demo device, but you can block the application, or you can detect malware on all Android devices as well as iOS devices and on Chrome OS.
Fantastic. As for the other questions, we can reach out and answer those individually, just to be aware of time. Yang, thank you very much. Pleasure hosting this webinar with you. And yeah, folks, thank you for joining us.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone.